Welcome, Gunrunner.
The whole idea of the Commodore 16 started off with the cries of Jack Tramiel that the Japanese were coming. Low-cost home computers already held on to a pretty big chunk of the market, and the Commodore founder envisaged this growing with the arrival of new machines from Japan. He had seen them come in and dominate other home electronics sectors like TVs and hi-fis, and so it made perfect sense to him that computers would be next. And it was a vision a lot of people shared. As it turned out, he had no need to worry, which I'll dig into more later in this video, and other than replacing the VIC-20 as Commodore's entry-level computer, the C16 ended up becoming a bit redundant. However, it did manage to sell 1 million units worldwide, so it retains a big enough user base to see people vote for it in my latest Amazing Facts poll. And what a poll it was, because I've never seen one so close. And in fact, the Commodore 16 didn't technically win, because it had the exact same amount of votes as the Acorn Electron, and only beat the Fujitsu FM7 by 1%. I ended up reposting the poll to try and get more votes after I saw a 3-way deadlock on Sunday morning, but by the time Monday evening had come around, the extra 100 odd votes hadn't made much difference, other than pushing the FM7 down slightly. So how did I decide that the C16 was the winner, I hear you ask? Well, I went back and looked at the results of the two previous times the Acorn Electron and Commodore 16 had been featured, and saw that the C16 had been a runner-up twice before, whilst the Acorn machine hadn't. So with that, Commodore won out. But this is just an intro, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, and I try to keep these opening parts short, because if I don't, a lot of you moan. So let's get on with the show, as I proudly present 10 amazing Commodore 16 facts.
You're my learning machine, you work like a dream. You're my computer divine. You're 16, you're a Commodore, and you're mine, oh mine. The new Commodore 16 computer, easy to use, easy to own. The affordable learning machine for the entire family. You're 16, you're a Commodore, and you're mine, oh mine, mine, mine.
The Commodore 116 range was created purely out of fear. Jack Tramiel was already worried about the emergence of low-cost home computers like the ZX Spectrum and Mattel Aquarius on the market, and had further concerns that the Japanese were ready to do the same thing with their MSX range. His fears were well founded too, as the Japanese were already dominating the home electronics sector with their lower price offerings, and had pushed many American companies out of business. So why would the computer market be any different? The plan was to release a new low-cost home computer called the Commodore 116 that would also replace the VIC-20 as the company's base model offering, and be significantly cheaper to manufacture too. It would feature a massively cost-reduced chipset, all based around the multi-purpose TED chip, more on that later, and feature a rubber chiclet style keyboard, not unlike the aforementioned Spectrum and Aquarius in fact. However, arguments soon broke out amongst the Commodore engineers and management over the final form of the 116, and to try and satisfy everyone, this soon became a range of different computers rather than just a single model. You'd think this would keep everyone happy, but it didn't, and further arguments broke out over what these computers were going to be and how much they were going to cost. This caused a huge amount of division within Commodore, and was ultimately one of the key reasons why Jack Tramiel was pushed out of the company he founded back in 1976. The base model 116, which was actually pretty close to Jack's final vision for the machine, ended up being released in Germany only, with a much larger Commodore 16 in a black VIC-20 style case being released in the rest of Europe and America to a rather negative reception. Despite the distinctly lacklustre launch to the 116 and C16, more models in the range would still follow, much to people's bemusement, but more on those later.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
There's no doubting that the most innovative feature of the Commodore 16 and indeed the wider 116 range is the TED chip. Designed by MOS Technology, the TED name was a shortening of Text Display, but that name is actually quite misleading because the TED did a lot more than just displaying text on screen. This clever integrated circuit contained sound generation hardware, DRAM refresh circuitry, interval timers, and keyboard input handling alongside the various video modes. There were 5 of these in total, which included a high-res text mode, multicolour text mode, 2 different multicolour graphics modes, and a mono high-res display, making it versatile for a lot of different functions. As mentioned, the TED is also responsible for the audio too, containing a simple tone generator producing 2 channels of audio. Between the 2 channels you could hear either 2 tones or 1 tone plus noise, meaning it wasn't ideal for creating music and was certainly a lot less capable than the SID chip found in the Commodore 64. Because the TED chip was responsible for so many different functions, which also included reading the keyboard and joysticks, the C16 couldn't actually function without it, and this makes the fact that the TED chip is notoriously unreliable the biggest flaw in the computer's design. Just do a quick search on eBay and you'll find loads of non-working C16s and Plus 4s listed, and I'd bet that the vast majority of these have faulty TED chips. It was even reported at the time that many computers were dead right out of the box, giving Commodore an even bigger headache when dealing with the really high level of returns.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
I wanted to cover this fascinating fact off next, because it leads right on from the last one, and this is all about the one area where the Commodore 16 has a huge advantage over its more illustrious big brother, the Commodore 64, the much larger colour palette. One of the key criticisms of the C64 was its rather restricted set of just 16 colours with a combination of strange pastels and various shades of brown. It seemed a big step back compared to its nearest rival, the Atari 8-bit, with its 256 colours and a wide range of different graphics modes. The TED chip in comparison was able to display a total of 121 different colours, an absolutely huge upgrade, and with no strange pastel shades to be seen anywhere. Obviously, the amount on screen depended on the graphics mode, as outlined in the last segment, but this is why Commodore 16 games sometimes look better than their C64 counterparts, even if the lack of hardware sprites and scrolling offset that somewhat. Okay, so this was the only real advantage of the C16 and Plus 4 over the C64, and it was certainly a lot less capable when it came to the audio, but still, at least it gives all the Commodore 16 fans out there something to shout about.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
Now, I've just spoken about how the Commodore 16 compared to the Commodore 64, and indeed its small advantage over its more popular sibling, so I think it's probably the right time to talk about its biggest downfall when compared to the other computers on the market at this time. Its tiny amount of memory, just 16K, 4 times less than the C64. Now, you might be thinking that 16K wasn't all that bad. After all, there were other machines around at this time making do with similar amounts, like the Atari 600 XL, and indeed the computer the C16 was built to replace, the VIC-20. But there is one key feature that those computers had which helped them greatly: the availability of games on cartridge. The beauty of these modules was that they replaced the boot-up ROM of the computer in question, giving them access to all the memory. Not just this though, the instant loading available from cartridge meant that you could keep replacing all the data when needed to make games larger, hence why 32K cartridges exist for the Atari 2600 when it had just 128 bytes of RAM. The C16's main media format was cassette tape, although expensive external disk drives and some cartridge games were made available. And once the computer had loaded the ROM and set up the screen, it left just 12K available to run the program in question, giving games programmers in particular a real headache. Although it was possible to add extra memory to the C16, either internally or via a RAM pack to bring it up to 64K, the same as the Plus 4, so few people did this that the vast majority of software targeted the 16K base model. This made it very difficult to create anything other than simple arcade-style games, and meant that the C16 missed out on many of the most popular computer games of the era.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
We can't tell the Commodore 16 story properly without talking about its close sibling, the Plus 4, which I already mentioned in passing in the 116 segment, of course. if you bought a Commodore 16 game back in the day, you would have always seen +4 displayed on the box too, as the computer was able to use all software designed for its lower cost brother. What became the +4 actually started off as a higher spec version of the 116 called the 232, which was then split off into two more projects, this one and the V364, which I'll talk about more later. And this revelation alone tells you an awful lot about the chaos within Commodore and those arguments I spoke about earlier. The initial idea for the 232 was a 116 with double the amount of RAM and a better keyboard, but the idea of a premium 116 model soon grew within the company, even though the C64 theoretically filled that space already. And it was soon decided to push this new machine as the business computer to replace the Commodore PET range instead. So they kept the general design of a better keyboard and more memory, but extended this further to 64K, and then also had the idea to put a range of business applications into the system ROM, which is where the +4 name comes from. The so-called Office suite would contain a word processor, spreadsheet, database program, and graph plotter, all easily accessible from the moment the computer booted. Now this sounds great in theory, doesn't it? A low-cost business computer that comes complete with all the applications a small office would need. I mean, this worked really well for Amstrad and their PCW, for example. But the absolute morons running Commodore at this time thought that they would retail the +4 for $300. That's 3 times the price of the C16. The +4 was torn apart by the press of the era. For the price it cost people, they at least expected a numerical keypad, seen as an essential for a business computer, especially one with a built-in spreadsheet package, and the promoted features, such as the extended colour palette, were seen as superfluous. Companies like Tandy were already offering up much better value for money packages, and within months of its late 1984 release, the +4 was being heavily discounted. In fact, the computer sold so badly that Commodore ended up shipping around 150,000 +4 computers to Hungary, where they were sold by the official distributor Novotrade, who later went on to become a video game developer themselves, due to their success with the +4, and most famously created the Echo the Dolphin franchise for Sega. As well as Novotrade's official support, a large amount of Hungarian developers also popped up to create games for the +4, and it's still very well supported by Homebrews in the country to this very day, including many unofficial conversions of all-time classics from other home computers, which I'll talk about a bit more later.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
Now, in that last segment I spoke about how the Commodore +4 was such a huge failure in the market, that it was being drastically reduced in price within months of release, and sadly it wasn't the only Commodore computer to suffer this fate, because the C16 ended up in quite a similar position. Although it launched at under $100 in the US, and indeed just a touch under £100 in the UK, it struggled to gain any kind of retail presence. The biggest problem was that the market the C16 was designed for no longer existed by the time the computer arrived. Most of the really low-cost computers like the Sinclair ZX81, Mattel Aquarius and TRS-80 had now exited the market, with no space left to be filled due to the rapidly falling cost of the components needed to produce more advanced colour home computers like the Atari XL, Commodore 64 and Sinclair ZX Spectrum. Who was going to pay $100 or £100 for a pretty basic 16K home micro when they could get a much more advanced one with a lot more software for not much more money? Within less than a year of the Commodore 16's launch, it had stopped being sold in North America altogether and was being sold for half the original price in Europe. In fact, the price dropped under £50 in the UK, actually saw the machine get a huge boost, with leading UK electronics retailer Dixons reporting that it was their best-selling home computer behind the market-leading ZX Spectrum for a short time. Although this was a good thing for its owners, with a raft of UK software houses scrambling to support the C16 with software, it wasn't so good for Commodore, who were making a huge loss on every computer sold. It also saw similar success in Italy too. Now you might be wondering what happened to all the unsold NTSC C16s. Well, they ended up in Mexico, where their leading chain of supermarkets sold them at a greatly reduced price. The computers sold so well for Aurora that they even commissioned new games for the C16 and ran regular competitions to create even more. They continued to sell the computer right into the 90s, only dropping it completely in 1993 in favour of new much cheaper PC compatibles. already talked about the 116, the C16 and the Plus 4 in this video already, but there is still one more model left in the range that I haven't really mentioned, the unreleased V364. This was set to be the flagship machine in the 116 range, boasting 64K of RAM, enhanced BASIC, a speech synthesis chip, and a built-in range of productivity programs, not unlike the Plus 4 in fact, which was ultimately chosen for release over this computer. If you look at some images of the V364 prototype, you will see it has some very similar styling to the Plus 4, but also reminds me a lot of the MSX2, with its separate joypad like arrow keys, separate numerical keypad, and function keys. I'm guessing this was somewhat intentional, given one of the main reasons for the development of the 116 range was as a reaction to the impending arrival of the MSX computers in North America, which ironically never really happened. According to ex-Commodore project manager Dave Haney, only a few pre-production prototypes of the computer were made for display at the 1983 CES show. At least 2 are known to be in the hands of collectors, making it one of the rarest home computers in existence.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
At the start of this video I mentioned how the Commodore 16 was the replacement for the aging VIC-20 and has a lot of things in common with the first home computer to sell 1 million units, including its almost identical case design, limited sound capabilities and restrictive memory. But one area where it took a huge step back was in terms of expandability. Firstly, there is no modem port on the C16, probably not a big concern, but such add-ons have become pretty standard for home computers at this time, although it is possible to add a port for such devices by soldering one to the board, as the connections for one are still there. Secondly, Commodore decided to use different ports for both joysticks and the data cassette. This meant that the ones from the Commodore 64 and VIC-20 were incompatible with the C16. Commodore did market specific Commodore 16 joysticks, data cassettes and disk drives, but some third-party companies also sold adapters to make 64 and VIC-20 ones work, as the pinout was actually the same. In fact, towards the end of the C16's life, Commodore themselves started bundling leftover tape drives for the computer along with one of those adapters so it would work right out of the box. Existing Commodore printers and disk drives could be used with the C16 without any kind of adapter needed. However, Commodore did market a specific C16 disk drive as noted, although these are very hard to come across.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
A bit earlier in this video, I spoke about how the Commodore 16 missed out on many of the big name computer games of the time due to its lack of memory, although there are a few exceptions to this rule like Gremlin and Elite, who ported many of their biggest hits over to the platform. That's not to say that it wasn't well supported. Indeed, due to its short sales boom in the mid to late 80s, a raft of titles soon arrived, but the vast majority of these were budget games. For those uninformed, I'm looking at you America, budget games were a really big thing in the UK in particular. These single tape games usually retailed for either $1.99 or $2.99 and could often be bought from the kinds of places you wouldn't expect to see video games at all. For example, garage forecourts, newsagents, grocery stores and chemists. These so-called pocket money games were one reason why home computers ruled the UK market through the 80s, as opposed to the console domination in North America, as British people were a lot more frugal and objected to spending £30 on a cartridge game when they could buy one just as good for £3. All the big name budget game publishers like Mastertronic, Codemasters, Players, Firebird and Alternative Software supported the Commodore 16 and played a big part in the computer's short-lived success. Indeed, if you ask people to name their favourite games for the C16, I'd bet that a large portion of them would be from these publishers.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
While the Commodore 16 had a pretty mixed story of success during its commercial life, one area where it definitely thrived is in its afterlife, as the C16 and Plus 4 are extremely well supported by the Homebrew community, especially by Hungarian programmers, and I spoke all about the reasons for the popularity of the computer in the Plus 4 segment of this very video. These homebrew games include a host of simply incredible ports from the arcades and other systems like Lemmings, Into the Eagle's Nest, Uridium, Prince of Persia, Castle Master, The Great Giana Sisters and the recent Turbo Outrun conversion, which is absolutely unbelievable. as well as games like Lands of Zardor, Digiloy, Alpha Ray, Adventures in Time, Dork Dave and Robots Rumble. I seriously suggest checking out the amazing Plus 4 World website that has a database listing all Commodore 16 and Plus 4 releases, including these modern homebrews, as well as downloads, latest news and other useful information. I've linked it down in the description to save you a Google search if you're interested. I should also note that most of these games do need 64K of memory, so if you do only have a standard C16, then you're going to need to upgrade it or grab a RAM cartridge to make the most of it and play all these modern marvels. And I can't wait to see what amazing games people come up with in the future that push this hardware even further than we ever thought possible.
This is the Commodore 16 computer in a learner pack. Plugs straight into your TV. It's probably the easiest computer for a beginner. The pack has a cassette recorder, a keyboard tutor program, how to program, learn to type program, and best, it's under $300. You can get this Commodore 16 learner pack from your retailer, and I strongly suggest you do, cause I'd rather turn on my Commodore than the television.
And that runs on my look at 10 amazing Commodore 16 facts. Which one of these fabulous facts was your favourite? I can only think of any other tantalising tidbits of trivia that I didn't include. I also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comment section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube backers for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Paul Daniel, Mins, Dos Gamerman, Luke MC, Carl Olsen, Seth Robinson, Frosty, Mark Strickland, Kalimatorn, Trogdor the Burninator, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, David Kitsune, David Maddox, Your Eyes Are Bleeding, Joe Casara, Classic Gamer 74, Bernard Santu, Peter Grantham, Noah Mann, Josh Hartman, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go check out my Patreon right now, where you can get access to host extra content including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.